Welcome to the NT podcast, Science and Theology. My name is Nemanja Jurišić. Today we have, for the second time, our really good and well-known guest, Stephen Ortiz. Professor Ortiz, welcome. How are you?
Thank you for the invitation. It's nice to be back.
It is nice to see you again. And today's topic is about your specialty because you are main on this excavation of Tel Gezer. So, Professor Ortiz, can you tell us something about that? What archaeology reveals about that biblical city?
Gezer is very famous within the field of biblical archaeology, but also within the biblical texts. Uh, there was a famous archaeologist, Yigo Yadin, that excavated at Hatzor, and the Germans already excavated at Megiddo, and Gezer was excavated by Macalister back in the turn of the century. And there's this typical six-chambered gate in the Iron Age. And he realized that perhaps Gezer had one. And this is a class, it's in all the archaeology textbooks where you have a six-chambered gate at Hatzor, Megiddo, and Gezer. And so that became, every student kind of studied that at Tel Gezer. Now we know that this is a common gate. Even the Philistines had six-chambered gates and everybody else. So it's not necessarily, always tied into, it doesn't prove Solomon built the gate. But yes, so became infamous. And naturally, I went back with my colleague Sam Wolff to re-excavate Gezer.
Okay, so can we talk about the period of late Bronze Age and early Iron Age? Because in 1200s we have settlements of Israelites. So what Gezer reveals of that time period?
Well, late Bronze Age is the period of the Canaanites, and Gezer was a large site from the Canaanite period. In fact, it was one of the cities that was destroyed by the Egyptian pharaoh Merneptah. Gezer is mentioned in the Amarna tablets in the 14th century BC as an important city, a Canaanite city-state that was important during the Egyptian hegemony over the Canaan at the time. And this is during the New Kingdom of Ramses II, starting in Thutmose III, Ramses II. And when Ramses II's son, Merneptah, had a campaign and came through the land, naturally, he conquered Ashkelon and Tel Gezer. And when he wanted to brag about his campaign, he said he called himself the conqueror of Gezer. And so it was an important city in the late Bronze Age period. In fact, our excavations in the last season, in 2017, we uncovered this destruction that we associate with Merneptah. And we found 3 bodies in this destruction. And why it's important for biblical history, the Israelite city that we associate with Solomon. And so we can see this transition from Gezer becoming Canaanite, and then it becomes under a new leadership or a new political entity. And we think those are the Judeans from Jerusalem.
Okay, so what we find from inscriptions or seals or anything, can you name some stuff from, let's say, a period of 13th century BC?
Well, there's a famous Gezer calendar that was found almost 100 years ago in classic Paleo-Hebrew. Some call it like a farmer's almanac. It's kind of talking about the seasons. Some think it's a schoolboys, like practicing their writing. But it's one of the earliest inscriptions that was found. And since then, we found many others. It'd be nice if it mentioned Gezer, if it mentioned the political organization. It didn't. It was just, simple inscription. But famous one, everybody who studies biblical Hebrew studies this inscription.
Great. And does it make sense if Israelites were in Egypt and went to Canaan, whole history of Exodus? So to Merneptah destroy Gezer at that time because they came, they should settle in those cities. So can you comment this?
Well, yes, in the book of Joshua, um, Gezer was the king of Gezer organized a group of Canaanites, cities in the foothills or the Shvelah, against Joshua uh, and the Israelites. And so we have this, most biblical scholars call it the Southern Battle, where Joshua came and attacked the Canaanites. This is where the sun stood still in the biblical text. Um, but what it tells us about the geopolitics is that Gezer was an important Canaanite city, contemporary with the Israelites that were just starting to populate the hill country up in the hills. It's given as a tribal allotment of Ephraim, but it was built by Judah, and it sits on the border between the north and the south. And so the Bible has this, it seems like it always changed hands between, does it belong to the north? Does it belong to the south? But it's in a central location. Even today, if you want to conquer Jerusalem, you have to go through Gezer. Every Gezer was so important that every time you wanted to capture Jerusalem, you had to come through Gezer. And so even modern battles had to go through this region. Um, even Syrian, they take the road up to Jerusalem, and that road passes through Gezer. So it sits in the Iron Valley. Gezer sat in an important east-west route. And this is why, in the later biblical period, Solomon fortified Gezer. It protected its western border, so to speak.
Thank you. Can we talk about Merneptah Stela a little because Gezer is mentioned, but also Yenoam. Can we locate that place because there is a lot of dispute? So
Two theories, and I'm forgetting the Egyptian text, but I think the Amarna text talk about Yenoam in Transjordan, in the Jordan Valley. Um, Others think that because you have Yenoam and then you have Israel, and it says his seed is not. And scholars debate, what does that phrase mean? His seed is not, you would assume it means their offspring. Like they conquered Israel and they don't have any more offspring. Others think that they attacked Israel and they attacked its crops. And so his seed is not means that it destroyed its barley, it destroyed the wheat. Um, I'm of the opinion that when it's poetic, it means his seed is not. It's not necessarily referring to agriculture. And I think you know him, or where did Merneptah meet Israel? Did they meet them already in the land? I think he met them in Transjordan as they were coming up the land, because this is where we have Yanom in the field. And I think this is, if Merneptah is trying to reestablish control, he comes up the coastal highway, he goes to the Jezreel Valley, and then he comes on the King's Highway in Jordan, in the modern state of Jordan today. And I think he's trying to reestablish the two main arteries going north and south of the roads. And he just happened to meet Israel as they were in Transjordan.
all right. And what about
That would be another
yeah,
site to go excavate in Yanoam, in the modern state of Jordan, to see if we can find archaeological evidence for that site.
what about theory of I think Manfred Vitak or someone else? They would say that Israel that is mentioned in Merneptah Stela, that's maybe Israel in Egypt, not in Canaan. So how would you answer on that critique?
Well, it's we have these Egyptian campaigns, from Thutmose, and they're pretty good with listing the sites that they're conquering next. And so you have Ashkelon, and then you have Gezer. And it's like it has to be within the southern Levant. It cannot be in Sinai or in the heartland of Egypt. So just the geography, the line of the battle doesn't make sense.
Yes, I agree. Thank you. And can we talk about location? How we know, how you as an archaeologist know that this is the same biblical Gezer? Uh, what is the requirements to know what is that's it? Yeah.
Well, one of the things that archaeologists would love to find is a sign that says, "Welcome to the site you're excavating. Welcome to Gezer." Um, we're fortunate enough that we do have these boundary inscriptions that are in the second century BC, either the Maccabean period or the early Hellenistic period. And you have um, one that says Achaeus and one that says that are in the fields around Gezer. So we're fortunate that we have a site that actually mentions the ancient city's name. Granted, it's in the second century BC, but that's the ancient city's name. We're fortunate that we have it. Uh, but other sites, we can look at the geography, we can look at the archaeology. So even when we look at the archaeology, the geography, where the site's located, other historical texts, um, we would postulate that this site is Gezer, even without the inscriptions. But it's nice to have writing.
Amazing. And
Yeah.
what are the first Israelite evidence of their settlement and what we find in archaeology? Because there were Canaanites and then Israelites come. So what we see in that time frame?
Well, archaeologically, in terms of material culture, we don't have we have the strongest evidence for Gezer being an Israelite city in the 8th century. This is where we have four-room houses. This is where we have typical Judean pottery. But what we do have is sometime in the 10th century, a major shift in the city planning of the city. And this is where we have a destruction of domestic buildings, and then all of a sudden a new fortification, a six-chambered gate, and what we found is a large administrative building built adjacent to the gate. And so this is some shift in political organization. Uh, this city is built on top of destroyed Canaanite houses. And if you're a Canaanite, you wouldn't destroy your house and build a new city. So it has to be a neo-political order. Um, Now we can say it's the Philistines. We have another political entity in the area, but we don't have much Philistine pottery. We know how Philistine houses look. Philistine cities have a temple. We don't have a temple in the Iron Age. And so it's better to assume that these are the Israelites that came down. And with the biblical text, we can postulate that this is an expansion. And we start to see this expansion already in other archaeological sites. Bet Shemesh up in the hills, just to the east of Gezer. You have to go from Bet Shemesh, you go down to Gezer. Bet Shemesh has this shift from a Canaanite city to an Israelite city. The recent excavations of Caiaphas, we have this brand new border site in the 10th century that is Judean. And that site is destroyed or abandoned. And it looks like we have this expansion as Solomon is getting stronger. He builds the next city, and that's at Gezer. And so we can see this expansion. So, um, uh, yes, the pottery looks like 10th century pottery, but also we have this city that's destroyed. okay, administrative center. And sometime in the late 10th century BCE, this city is destroyed and a new city is built on top. And we have another Egyptian campaign, Shishak. In the end of the 10th century, 925, he comes, and it's debated because where the inscription is at the Karnak temple, it's destroyed. But it looks like the next city would be Gezer. And sure enough, we have a major destruction at Gezer. And they destroy this one city. And this has to be the Israelite city that expanded. Because when the city is rebuilt, that administrative building, palace, administrative center, whatever we want to call it, we have everyday houses built on top of it. So what it looks like is the Judean kingdom is weak. And we have this in the biblical text. After Solomon, we have the divided monarchy, and we have Shishak destroying it. So Rehoboam is not strong enough to occupy Tel Gezer. It's destroyed by the Egyptians, and all of a sudden Judah shrinks in size. And when it shrinks, we think the local Canaanites, because they're not Judean houses that are built on top, they're segmented houses. So the Canaanites move back in and occupy Gezer. And then this city is also eventually destroyed. And so when we tie in the archaeology, the shifts in the social organization that we see in the buildings, it fits what we see in the biblical text of Judah expanding under Solomon and then contracting under Rehoboam and Jeroboam.
Great, but can we go back even, because shouldn't we expect some destruction later in the time of Joshua, because we have Joshua 10:33. It says that some king Horam from Gezer was destroyed, and his people, and what do you think?
We have no evidence of Israel conquering that city. And even that biblical text, as I said, the city of Gezer organized this campaign. They killed the king, but they never attacked the city of Gezer. And we have another reference when King David conquers Jerusalem. He unites the 10 northern tribes. He was down in Hebron. He unites the tribes. The next thing we see in the book of Samuel is the Philistines coming up that valley to attack David. And they attack him twice. The first time he repels them going back down the hill. They come back again, and he chases them up to Beth Horon, and they run down to Beth Horon, and he says David chased them all the way to Gezer, and the Philistines go to Gezer. So we already know that Gezer still stayed in the Canaanite hands. And when David went to go fight the Philistines, they ran to Gezer, and David stopped the chase. And so at that point, Gezer was a fortified city. So David knew, okay, they're safe in Gezer. They're not coming again. The Philistines never went back and attacked Jerusalem. And the same valley that they went up, the Elah Valley, this is where we have this fortress of Caiaphas. So I think David wised up and he said, you know what? They're going to come up this valley to attack Jerusalem. I'm going to build a fort down at the bottom so we can attack them or stop them down in the valley before they come up to the hills. This isn't mentioned in the Bible. We just happen to find it archaeologically, but it fits. So we can take the biblical stories. And remember, the biblical author didn't give us all the historical details. It was just talking about how great Yahweh was with his people. It's archaeology that gives us all the other details there. And so now, when we write our Bible maps, we have to say like, okay, Joshua fought them, but he didn't conquer that city. And it stayed in their hands. And then we have David coming back and not being able to conquer that city. Um, I think if you look at where Gezer's located, this is where Tel Dan was supposed to occupy the land. And what do we know about the Danites? They didn't occupy the land. They went up north and they conquered the city of, of Laish, of Tel Dan. And so they were the ones that were supposed to conquer or occupy that area according to the plan of, the allotments of the tribes. Since they didn't do it, Gezer stayed a Canaanite city. And even at the time of David, it was Canaanite. If David wasn't able to conquer it, how did it come into Solomon's hands? The king of Egypt conquered Gezer and gave it to Solomon as a dowry. So that's how strong Gezer was as the Canaanite city. It was a major center. And it wasn't until, Solomon became strong and the Egypt conquered and gave it to him. Do we have it in Israelite hands?
Yes, so all the way to Solomon, that was Canaanite city. So
Yes.
interesting. And we have text from Joshua 21:21. It says that they gave them Shechem with her, etc., and Gezer with her suburbs. So how they can receive Gezer if that's not their city?
How do we rectify this discrepancy in the biblical text and archaeology?
Yes.
We have, when you compare Joshua and the book of Judges, we see a lot of apparent discrepancies. And I think Joshua was describing this is what should have happened. And we have those lists. This is what they should have conquered. And then in Judges, we have, yes, but Israel failed and didn't accomplish much. And then we see that one. And so we have both accounts there written down to see, and we have this comparison. It's only as archaeologists, and we look at the data, can we actually reconstruct where Israel did well and conquered, and we can reconstruct where Israel also failed and didn't live up to what they were supposed to do.
Yes, good answer. In Judges 1:29, it says, neither did Ephraim drive out the Canaanites that dwelt in Gezer. So, yeah,
Yes, so
that's
there's this memory. And even in Judges 1, in the first chapter, you have like Jerusalem conquered 3 times. And it's just like, how do you explain this? And it's sort of like later on, they knew it was supposed to be conquered, and they remembered David conquered it. And so they attributed, and Judah conquered it. Like they remembered that, so they put it in, in the text there. So you have these, how would I say, unfinished sentences of, of the text there. And then later, the history, people say like, right, Jerusalem's our capital. During the period of Solomon, we have to put a footnote in there. And we do that, when we write, we'll put footnotes to describe it. Well, they didn't have a place to put footnotes. They just put it in the text. And so here you can see a later editing or a later tradition. But this also shows me that Joshua and Judges are earlier traditions. Because if they were going to make up the story, they would clean up all the discrepancies. They would just say, and Joshua conquered Jerusalem. We wouldn't have this in. So we can see where we have the earlier traditions and then the updated biblical text. And so this shows you that Joshua and Judges was an earlier account, earlier traditions of what they were supposed to do. And then we have later history, even in the book of Samuel telling us what happened. But this
really
is for
good
another
argument.
podcast. This is a whole new area of. In fact,
Yes,
I
I
have
never
one of my
thought on that.
students who, his dissertation, I have him to do an archaeological commentary on the book of Joshua and Judges. and she kind of like put it together. We do this for the New Testament. We have the Synoptic Gospels, and we talk about Matthew, Mark, and Luke and how they have different things out of order. It's like they're going to take some of Jesus's sayings about the kingdom and they kind of group them together. But then somebody might have another one and go, okay, well, this is when Jesus said it up in Galilee. He said it again in Jerusalem, but they're kind of collating his sermons. So we have New Testament scholars that will kind of, okay, let's recreate the history of when things were said. Um, and I think we can do the same thing for Joshua and Judges. Now with archaeology, we can kind of like, put together the both accounts as one period in Israelites' history.
Yes, so Judges and Joshua and Samuel and others are like Gospels of the Old Testament. Can we say like that? Because
Yes,
of those
and
contradictions, yeah.
yeah.
Okay, so can we say something more about 10th century United Monarchy? Because in First Kings 9:15, I think, it says that Solomon built walls around the Jerusalem, Hatzor, Megiddo, and Gezer. So do we find that wall?
Yes, at Gezer, we find a new fortification wall. It's a casemate wall. We have it next to the six-chambered gate. More importantly, we have ashlar masonry. Ashlar masonry, this is well-carved rectangular stones uh, that it takes time to build this. These are what kings build. This is like here in the United States, the White House is built with nice, large, stones. So in the ancient world, this shows you that this was an important city. Um, it was a center, and it was some authority, centralized authority. Some king has to make people carve this stone and build it nice. And this is what we have at Gezer, this brand new ashlar masonry in this administrative building, in the gate complex. This is a new, um, this corresponds with the biblical text where we talk about this kingdom being built and Solomon choosing cities. Not only do we have cities for taxes, we have judicial system. We're having this centralized authority uniting all the tribes and becoming districts. And so we can see this in the text. And Gezer happens in the 10th century. We have this, um, at least an administrative center and building and fortifications that date to the 10th century.
Okay, so what minimalists and the skeptics say about Gezer? Are there any challenges and big problems do you face?
Well, yes, you have the low chronology proposal by Finkelstein, and um, this was at the heart of the debate is when did centralized authority or when did the state develop? And archaeologically, we don't have writings. We don't have, this is the state developed, this city belongs to this government. So we have to look at material culture to talk about the state. And when we want to talk about a state and material culture, we go like, well, a state's going to have centers throughout the land. They're going to have fortifications. They're going to have military outposts. Even today, a state has all these types of structures and government buildings. So when we find these government buildings dating to the 10th century, early archaeologists said, well, this is evidence of the state. This is Judah, this is Israel building these capitals. Finkelstein comes along and says, okay, we're misdating these fortifications and these administrative centers and these gates. They actually belong to the 9th century. And so this is the low chronology. We're moving down all this evidence of state formation to the 9th century. And there can be some truth to that. The 9th century, we had states and they were still building. Um, the 8th centuries where we had some of the major rebuildings of the Israelite period. And so if you take a site like Gezer, where we have all this monumental architecture that dates to the 10th century, and you move it to the 9th century, then you're saying that the state didn't start in the 10th, it started in the 9th. And so this is where this redating went with all these fortified cities. And it was all based on pottery and ceramics. Uh, yes, Gezer was part of the debate. My major, Dr. Father William Deaver, fought Finkelstein for several years that Gezer belongs to the 10th century. We sort of went back to investigate that. I remember my co-director, Sam Wolff, asked me, Steve, what if we find out that the gate dates to the 9th century, not the 10th century? Then I'll say, then the gate dates to the 10th century. And he comes and goes like, wouldn't you get in trouble because the Bible says this? I go, no, the Bible doesn't say Solomon built a gate at Gezer. I go, he could have conquered it. We don't need, the gate doesn't necessarily mean a state. I go, now if you say there's no 10th century at Gezer, I'd have a problem. I go, so it is possible because if a state starts, it's not like within 10 years they build all these cities. It takes a while. The United States was a big state. It took us 200 years to build what we have. It takes time to build these infrastructures, a railroad, road systems. Well, same thing in the ancient world. If you have a new state forming, it could take 100 years to build this infrastructure, what we see there. So I wouldn't have a problem. I would just say like, okay, I have to say this is how it happened during the time of Solomon. Now, fortunately, we have good C14 dates at Gezer. And it's sort of like, look, this was built in the 10th century. So but if it wasn't, it wouldn't change what I thought about the Bible. I would just say Solomon didn't build that. And even now, trends in state formation, we have 10th century, this Edomite state. They have this major geopolitical copper industry where they're shipping copper across the ancient world. It's like you need some type of organization to control this copper. This is a state. These are the Edomites. But we don't have any monumental buildings. So we have these nomads or Bedouin that form a state. And as archaeologists, we say, wait, that can't happen. You need to have major, buildings. Well, we look at the rest of the ancient world. Genghis Khan built an empire. And these were, horsemen. They lived in tents. But Genghis Khan controlled a large part of Central Asia. And so now we as archaeologists are coming back and saying, look at the Edomites didn't have fortified cities, but they had a state. And they had this major thing. So things are shifting now. We're not requiring to find these fortifications. And even when we go back and start reading the biblical text, during the time of David, he'd have a celebration and he'd go like, Israel, go back to your tents. And we always thought that was poetic. Okay, this is going back to Joshua and Judges. But now we know, especially in the Middle East, you have urbanization, but you also have Bedouin. You have nomads. And we have to assume that the time of David and Solomon, they also had that. They had urbanization, but there are a lot of people that aren't going to survive the archaeological record. And so now we have to say, like, it's possible that there were more people, the population was greater than just looking at the urban centers, because we have a whole group of people that are invisible in the archaeological record. And so it's shifting what we're talking about when we talk about the state, because it's like, we kind of created this assumption that a state has to have monumental architecture. And now we have 10th century states that don't, but we're calling them states. So this is even, coming back to destroying the model of, even if you move the low chronology, all these monumental structures to the 9th century, there can still be a state in the 10th century. It still fits the chronology. So it's just a whole new world now of how we're defining what a state is. But coming back to the low chronology, the dating, no, our major fortification dates to the 10th century. In fact, we have a destruction on top of it that also dates to the 10th century. So it even keeps it, in terms of C14 dates, we have a solid datum point for the Solomonic city.
So multiple arguments. And how many samples of C14?
2550.
Wow. Okay.
And we even have more
they all
samples.
point
If somebody wants to test us, it's like, well, we have, if you want to pay the $500, you can do a C14 test. We have the more seeds to,
Yes, so they are all, or many of them, points to 10th century, right?
Yes.
Okay. So can we talk about population? How many people lived in Gezer in late Bronze Age, in the time of United Monarchy, and yeah.
Oh, that's where you get on debates on, population. But just in general, let me take Jerusalem as an example. Jerusalem was only 10 acres. Sorry for using a Western, term. But when I speak in churches, I lived in Texas, I'm in Tennessee. We have mega churches. And when I'm talking to the church, I'll go, your parking lot is 20 acres. Your parking lot is twice the size of the capital of Jerusalem. And they just like freak out. I go, your youth building where you have high school kids is bigger than and now granted, these are big church, this is America. So, and in Texas, you have these big, 3,000, 4,000 member churches. And these are big auditoriums. And it freaks people out. They go like, wait, Jerusalem's supposed to be this big? I go like, no, this is the 10th century BC. They didn't have railroads. They didn't have, this is, the population was smaller. I go, it's only later that we as Westerners, whether you're, Europe, Eastern Europe, Western Europe, America, North America, we have modern worlds. We have, high rises. We have, dense urbanized populations. But in the ancient world, it wasn't like that. People had to still go out and, grow the fields. We didn't have this, separation between farmland and where the city was. And so, yeah, the populations were a lot smaller. You can talk about 5,000 to 15,000 people. Even in, I'm here in America. I live in a suburb south of Nashville. We were like 20,000 people. Now we're like 50,000 because a lot of people are migrating to Nashville and they can't afford Nashville, so they have to move out to the suburbs. But, Nashville has 5, 6 cities around it that just keep growing. And these are just like the suburbs built around a major city. The ancient world didn't have that. You had the center of the city, then you have the next city. Now, part of that is we have underground plumbing. We have water that's pumped in. So we can build a city anywhere because we move the water. In the ancient world, you didn't have that. So your population centers, your villages, your towns were built around a water source. And this is how people lived in biblical times. And that's my um, major shift when I'm trying to teach students about archaeology. And they go, "This is the city." It's just like they were small. Uh, Joshua and Judges, when they came and they conquered people, um, they were small cities. And we think of Pompeii, like the Roman Empire, these large cities there. But when you go back to the Old Testament, um, a town of 3,000, a town of 5,000 was a major city.
Yes. So what it means when Jesus in Matthew 6:6 say, when you pray, go into your private room and shut the door. Did people had a really private room or something?
Um, I don't think they had bedrooms like we have. Even when we look at the four-room house, they go, where did people sleep? Uh, they think, okay, you have a daughter who has her own room. You have a son, he has his own room. I agree. That didn't happen. Everybody lived together. Even, up to the modern period, Palestinian homes, people lived in the same one room. You pulled out your mats and you slept on the ground. That's how you slept. And when we think of the four-room house, the Israelite house, we have rooms in the back, and we always thought those were the bedrooms. But no, they were the storage. People lived in the center and on the roof. Now we do have holy man. Let's build a little room on top of the roof. And so we do have some, we can see that there are some private rooms and some private spaces there. But yeah, by the time we get to the New Testament, I do think we have some more um, courtyard houses that are a little bit bigger that we can talk about that.
Okay, thank you. And is it good estimate from Bill Dever? He would say about 2,500 people around the 10th century, and in 8th or 9th century about 3,000. So is it good estimate to your opinion?
You mean for Tel Gezer?
Yeah, guess so. Yeah.
Oh, yes. That would.
Okay. And you mentioned calendar. Can you say more about the literacy about that period? Did people know to write and how much? And yeah.
Oh, that's the big debate. Yeah. I tend to think one of the most important inventions in the ancient world was the alphabet. Cuneiform over 600, Egyptian hieroglyphics. They needed scribes to study and to be able to write. An alphabet is from 20 to 30 symbols. Ancient Hebrew is 22. English is 26. That's the alphabet. When you're 5 years old, you learn your country's alphabet. Kids can learn it because it's simple, and we learn our ABC, so to speak. So the question is, who invented the alphabet and the impact that it had? Was it the Phoenicians? Was it slaves in Sinai? I like to think it was Israelite slaves that invented this alphabet, and they were able to learn it. Um, uh, some of the inscriptions we have, Iron Age 1, 1200 to 1000 BC, we have arrowheads with names on them. And it's sort of like somebody was able to go kill an animal and then go back and say, I'm the one who killed it, or this arrowhead belongs to me because I have my name on it. That means people were able to read somebody's name and go, oh, okay, this is Mordecai's. This belongs to Mordecai. We have symbols that says kadosh, holy. So people are able to describe, okay, this is the contents of this are for the Lord, they're holy, and they have to be able to read it. Now, some people could memorize the symbols because kadosh is just 3 letters. But there's a question. We have people practicing. We have ABCDaries. These are people practicing the alphabet. they're written on carved on stone. The Gezer calendar might be, one of these learning tablets. Um, we have scribal practices where they're teaching them how to write. So it's a big question. There's not a lot of writing, but writing doesn't survive as much. But we have to assume, and that's the debate. I tend to lean more toward people who are more literate. Um, this is the Kurbit Kayafa inscription. You have these like a law code there and advanced syntax. And they're going like, wow, this isn't just somebody writing their name, knowing their name. Um, the Ketephinome inscription, the priestly benediction. It's just like common people have, whole texts, complex of texts. And so we have to assume there's a lot more that just don't survive the archaeological record. But I can go either way. Sometimes I go like, yep, people were more literate. Other times I look at the modern states and the literacy. Uh, uh, I don't know. But if you ask me, when I teach, I say there is more literacy than scholars assume. And the more inscriptions we find, we just find more evidence of that.
So, is it a good estimate to say about 5%, 10% people were literate, as some scholars would say?
I would hold that. I would even go up to like 15, 20%. But I'm just a super maximalist in literacy.
Yeah. Okay. So what do you think about people like Gary Ransburg? He said that maybe Torah was written in Jerusalem in the 10th century. So is it possible, according to your knowledge of literacy of that period, for someone to write something like Torah in 10th century or any other books of Samuel or there?
Uh, y yes, but I think I respect Rendsburg. I like his work. Um, I do think I mentioned the Kayafa inscription kind of has this, hint of Torah type of writing. Um, I do think that when it comes to the biblical text, that they would have had the Torah earlier on. I don't think it would have been widespread, around. Um, but I think we talked about the 10th century, the state. One of the functions of a state is to document the state and its laws. And the Torah was basically like the laws of the state, a lot of the text itself. So I do agree with him that in the capital, there would have been this like, hey, we have to start documenting our history. And when you get to the later, like Book of Kings, it's more dynastic. And so became king in the 4th year of so and so, and he did this, and his mother's name was so and so. When we look at David, we don't have that. We have David's like his battles. It's kind of like the oral traditions. Here's our great king and the battles he had.
Like epic stories, right?
Yes, yes. So we can even see the shift. So I think sometime they realized we have to start writing this down. And when we had the time of David, it was still more oral history. Here's the battles. Here's, David's mighty men. But we do have lists. We have David's wives. We have David's sons. We have, earlier on, we have Saul. So that's part of the state. You start to have to document this. So, yeah, I think with Rendsburg that you could have the Torah being written down at that point. But I don't think you have Josiah's time, they lost the Torah. People there didn't even know what this book was. So, you know what I'm saying? So I think it was a small group of priests that had the Torah, but I think the oral traditions would have been strong there. Oh. So it's a little bit of both. So I don't think there would have been more literacy, but I think in the 10th century, it is possible that you have scribes whose job was to preserve the history of ancient Israel and record it.
Amazing. But when we look like Moabite stone, it's shorter than Torah or books of Samuel. So is it incredible to have that long, um, how to say, book? Or yeah, it's much larger than Moabite stone, but Moabite stone is even later. So
Well, yes, and we come back to literacy. It's like you have these accounts that are put in the center of the city. Like people have to be able to read it or at least recognize it. If not, you would just put pictographs or a picture describing the story. It's like children when we have picture books. We have pictures of a story and we kind of read them the story. We have the picture books. Well, if you're illiterate, that's what you would use. You would put more pictures up there. Um, but if you have this writing in this text, the Moabite inscription, the Beit David inscription, these are put out so people can write, can read, saying, I am the king, I conquered you. Here's the account, and here are my gods. So there is some sense of, when I say literacy, I see like, okay, 15, 20% of the people might be able to read the Moabite inscription. It's there for a purpose so people can, read it.
all right, thank you so much. And just two questions, if we have time to cover. What happened later after Solomon period? We have Tiglath-Pileser III in 8th century. So what we find in archaeology about Gezer?
Well, Gezer disappears from the biblical text. We don't have it mentioned again. We have a major Judean city in the 8th century. Pillared buildings, four-room houses, the pottery. So who rebuilt this city? We have a text that Uzziah conquered the gates of Ashdod. So Uzziah already expanded the kingdom and went down to the Philistine coast. Well, to get there, he has to rebuild cities. And I think he's the one who rebuilt Gezer. The Bible doesn't say it, but sometime before Tiglath-Pileser came and destroyed the city and mentioned it as a Judean city, somebody had to rebuild it. And so Uzziah is the best one who was strong enough to expand the kingdom. So I think Gezer was rebuilt by Uzziah. And we even have evidence of an earthquake there. So that's during the time of Uzziah. So, I'm quite comfortable associating it with that king. And boom, yeah, we have Tiglath-Pileser who comes up and describes it and destroys Gezer. And it's a Judean city. And we have that destruction all over the place. It's
Great. And what happened later with the city in the Hellenistic periods and even further?
Well, again, we have another gap, but it became a Hellenistic city, and the Maccabees fought the Hellenists, and they took over Gezer, and then it went back to the hands of the Hellenists, the Romans, and that's where these inscriptions are found. We do have Hellenistic occupation up there. And one of the questions, are these Jewish? We don't find, we might have some mikvaot that McAllister excavated, but these could also be tombs. But that's the big question. When did Gezer come into Judean hands or Maccabean hands? And how long did it stay there? But you're now moving into modern history for me. I stay in the Old Testament. So you're already moving to.
Yes, I like also Old Testament. So yeah, we will stick
Yes.
to. Yes. And what are the oldest layers? We have, I think, Chalcolithic period of that city or early Bronze Age. So what we find in those layers?
We have pottery that dates to the Chalcolithic period, but in terms of occupation, we have early Bronze Age tombs. So Gezer was an ancient city. Just to the south of it, we have Tel Yarmouth. So it was this is a rich region. Water sources, you have the valleys. So you had occupation there from the third millennium that was very robust. And we have to assume that Gezer was a major, early Bronze Age city. We just haven't gotten far down to, the occupation.
Yes. Okay. So, Dr. Ortiz, any conclusion of this discussion? What are the most recent discoveries from Gezer do you want to mention, or maybe future projects on this? So, anything to add?
Well, um, I have other colleagues that were digging the water system. This is a major thing. When does the water system date to? Uh, we are, I'm having several PhDs being written about Gezer, and one just defended. She'll be getting her PhD in end of this week. We're at the end of the school term. She did a phenomenal study on right after Shishak's destruction, who were these Canaanites? Uh, and we can see the shift in house planning and city planning. And it looks like Lachish, Kerbat al-Rai in the 10th century, these are major cities, but they didn't have four-room houses. They had like just a single pillar one. And we had that at Gezer. And we thought this isn't a house. But now we see that the Judean cities in the Shvei had a different house structure. So we might be able to even start talking about regional house plans of the Israelites and Judeans. So there's a lot of new stuff coming out within the archaeology of the Southern Shvei. But I've already moved on from Gezer. We're still publishing it. We moved to Tel Burna, and now we're looking for a new project. So I'm staying in the Judean site, but maybe I'll go back to the Philistines, and that's where I started my career. And so next time you see me, I might be excavating a Philistine city.
Amazing. Thank you, Dr. Ortiz. That brings us to the end of our conversation. And dear audience, please follow our channel, share this interview if you like it, comment if you want to say something or ask or anything. So, Dr. Ortiz, thank you for sharing your insights and for your incredible work you are doing on the ground. So, thank you so much for coming.
Well, thank you for letting me tell the story of Gezer. It's a great story.